And we are now live and recording. So listen, we'll basically go right into the intros. I'll give you a quick background on me. My name is Amar Sheth. I'm the customer success leader at Sales for Life. We are a global authority on this topic of social selling. We love to talk about all things sales, and who better than to invite to speak to us and the audience than Anthony Iannarino. Anthony is a class act, and I'm glad he's with us today. So Anthony, please introduce yourself, and we'll rock and roll from there.
I think a lot of people here probably already know. You can find me at thesalesblog.com, where I've been publishing daily for about 8 years. You guys would call that social selling, right?
Absolutely.
I would call content marketing. We're close. I talk about cold calling. Amar ribs me about it. We started right off on the cold calling thing with the jab from Amar before you guys were on. You can also find me at youtube.com/Iannarino. And I would point you at my new book, The Lost Art of Closing. I think it's a very, very integral piece of how we're going to sell in the future. And you can find that on Amazon.
That's awesome. Folks, go check that out. We'll try to get the links for you in the show notes afterwards as well. So we'll link to Anthony, his social accounts, his books, etc. Definitely recommend you go check that out. So let's do this. Let's start, and I want to actually start with a poll question. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. If you look on your screen in about 10 seconds, there should be a poll on your screen, and the question is really simple. Which parts of the sales process do you find most challenging? Is it prospecting and qualification? Is it opportunity management, negotiations towards close, account management? Obviously, we've kind of limited to one answer, but let us know what is the most hardest part for you or the most challenging part for you. So I'm going to give everyone about, let's say, 20 more seconds, and then we'll kind of close the polls after that.
What are you guessing, Amar?
I'm actually looking at the answer, so I can't really guess it.
You can't guess. I'm going with prospecting.
Yeah, so am I, actually. We've got 73% of the folks here that have voted. Let's try to push the number to 80, and then we'll close the poll, okay? All right, let's actually close the poll now, and we're almost at 80. We're at 78%. Let me share the results with everyone, and voila. There you are. So prospecting and qualification. Anthony, before we even get into today's topic, what are your thoughts on that? Is this unique to you? Is this something that resonates? Is this similar?
I just wrote a book called The Lost Art of Closing. It's 10 commitments. And the 10 commitments are generally the commitments that we gain between target and close. And I started that book by saying probably one of the most difficult commitments to get is the commitment for time. And that's the first one that we need. And I think that we've been doing this for so long. Our clients have built up sort of an immunity to our pitch, especially because our pitch normally sounds like, Amar, I'd love to come out, introduce myself, introduce my company, tell you a little bit about what we do, and then ask you some questions. And people are like, wow, what a terrific value prop for me. You're going to come out and talk about you. Sounds delightful. I think it's really, really difficult to get that first commitment unless you have something to say and if you have a point of view. And it's important to remember we're always trading value for the time that we ask for. So you have to have a value prop now that says this person is worth my time, whether I do business with them or not. And that's what's really changed. So I expected to see that one as number one, specifically because the commitment for time, it's all of our single, finite, non-renewable resource. You can't get any more of it. So when I give it to a salesperson that can't create value for me, I can't get it back.
That's very true. And in fact, just to keep the conversation rolling, I want to cut to the next slide and almost start today's topic. Anthony, you just gave an example about salesperson and prospect or potential customer. Well, at sales kickoffs, the salesperson is actually the customer, right? And the ones that are doing the selling are typically those that are trying to capture mind share. So the topic of today, folks, is really about, cutting out the product training, or at least minimizing it to the best of our abilities. And it's not that product training doesn't have a place at SKOs, but definitely salespeople need greater context on how it's going to help them sell. Anthony, do you agree? Do you think that that's necessary? You speak at dozens and dozens of kickoffs a year. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that it's a mistake to make product the central thing that we do at a sales kickoff for a whole bunch of reasons. And I think along with what you're talking about with skills-based training, I would add one other thing. I think that a sales kickoff is really mindset and skill set. And it's important to have new products. It's important that people understand what the product or the solution does and how it creates value and the problems that it solves. But we're really not doing product training when we're at a sales kickoff. I mean, that's really not the outcome. The outcome is to give people the mindset shift, to reinvigorate people, to charge them up and juice them so that they can go out and do good work. And it's really about the skill sets. And this is the hardest thing for product-based, especially organizations, to understand. If the product was going to go sell itself, that would be a great place. But the reason that salespeople are struggling is because of mindset and skill set and not product. So when you make product a biggest part of a sales kickoff, it's an enormous mistake because you're missing the opportunity to give the salespeople what they really need to succeed, which is mindset and skill set.
I love that. In fact, hey, folks, I see questions pouring in for Anthony already, so keep sending them. I'm moderating. I'll get the questions over to Anthony and we'll answer. So Anthony, there's a question here from Charlie. So let me kick off and kind of start the first one here. What Charlie is saying is, but hey, Anthony, at kickoff is the only time that I want my salespeople learning and not selling. So any other time that product training should be available is actually taking out of selling time. It's a bit of a valid point, Charlie, right? I will give you that. But Anthony, you still stand by your commitment, right? That the kickoffs are for mindset and skill set, right?
I would push back on this and just say, Charlie, if your people are skilled up and they need no more skills improvement, by all means, spend the time on product training. But I would tell you, I would take a more skilled salesperson with less product knowledge over one with exceptional product knowledge and less skills every single time I was made that offer. I don't think that people fail because the product training isn't good enough. And I think that in many cases with complex products, I see people struggle because of the complexity. We've got subject matter experts we can rely on and other people that can come in and help. I think that I would over-index on skills long before I would do it on product. If I have a chance to get people together, I want them to leave and be able to take new actions with new behaviors that produce better results than the results that they're producing now. And you're right, you get people for a short time, you're taking them out of the field. What do they really need? I would just say it's really important to decide what do they need? Where are the deficiencies that you need to shore up?
Yeah, great answer. There's actually some comments coming in. Let me just get to one because there's a lot of similar comments coming in here, guys. One basically says, and this is from Clara. Clara, I hope you don't mind that I'm calling you as I read this, but Anthony, Clara basically says, well, salespeople really don't want mindset or skill set training. I'm paraphrasing, but she's saying they don't want kind of that skills training, right? That product is actually what they're asking for. Clara, I want to actually have Anthony address that while I pop open the news slide on your screen, which should be now. And it essentially says that a lot of companies and a lot of leaders think that salespeople don't want skill training, but in fact, the data shows they do. So there's actually another slide to this, but I'll have Anthony address this point first as we continue unraveling this story.
Okay, so Amar, when you came into Sales for Life this morning and you're there at the Galactic headquarters, I can see because you've got the banner behind you, was there a line of people waiting for you at the door to buy from you?
No.
Okay, sorry about that.
But there wasn't, no.
I know, I wish there were too.
Yeah.
This is the iPhone 8 Plus. Apple has found a way to create a product that people will stand in line for and will place orders early. Every salesperson on earth wants a product that sells itself. Everyone does. They want the product to do all the heavy lifting. And there's 4 levels of value. You can go search my YouTube for levels of value and you'll find the videos. The first level is product. Product makes you undifferentiated and it commoditizes you.
Yeah.
What you need are insights and you need skills that take you beyond that to what I would call level 4 value, which means strategic, which means I have insights and I can help you run your business better. It doesn't really matter if salespeople want a product that sells itself and they want that to do all the heavy lifting. It's not going to happen unless you came into your office today and there were a line of people at your door to try to buy from you. Product isn't going to be enough to generate, one, the demand, or two, to create the opportunities that allow you to grow your business. So if product alone was enough, I would say do that. But for most of us, we don't have a model where we have a product that allows us to do that. What they really need is the skills that are necessary to develop and create opportunities, and then to manage and win those opportunities. So it's opportunity creation and opportunity capture. Anything that you can do to give people those skills, whether it's sales kickoff, is going to do far greater than giving them another product.
Yeah, really well said. I want to go to another question. And Anthony, the questions are just pouring in here, so I've got a ton for you. I'm going to pick one here. Actually, it's a two-part question by Lorena. And in fact, as I asked this, let me actually just go to the next slide. Lorena asks, Anthony, what are your thoughts on building sales skill sets around products and or product demos? So at the kickoff, is there a way that we can take new product launch ideas or new product wishes and kind of incorporate that into skills? Is that even possible? I know many companies have tried. I've spoken at kickoffs where that's been attempted, but my personal feeling, Lorena, is that it's not been done well. Anthony, what's your experience?
I've seen it done well a number of times, and it takes an enormous amount of work on the front end to design sort of a path to say, okay, there's a new product. So what's the why change around the new product, and how do we create the opportunities as a skills-based exercise after learning about the product? But it's only a little bit of product and then a lot about what's the why change message. And then there's what insights do we have that suggest that this is how to execute this product and why your client should use it and how they're going to. And so there's a skills-based discovery and a skills-based presentation. I've seen it done well a number of times, but it does take a lot of work to align it around, look, we're going to give you a little bit of the basics on the product, and then we're going to walk you through and make you do the exercises that say, integrate this into your sales process, be able to have these conversations and get the outcomes. I think that's probably the best way I've ever seen it done, is to be very, very integrated around mindset and skill set, and then putting the product behind that. We're going to use it as the case study.
That's a great question. Lorena, I hope that answers both parts of your question. All right. If not, please let me know. Folks, the data that you see on your screen is compiled from Vorsight. Okay. They're based out in the DC area. And Vorsight has studied this quite extensively. And what they found is that it's not that salespeople don't want the info on products and services. It's not that they don't want, but it's exactly what Anthony described. So Anthony's hitting the nail on the head, which is that there is a very hard job that has to be done on the front end, but salespeople do want new products presented or new ideas presented, but from a skill set and mindset perspective, right? So 71% of salespeople basically said that the most useful thing that they learned at their last kickoff was exactly that. And in fact, if you look at the data point just below that, what would you like to see more of on a go forward basis? You know, over 60% would definitely agree. So prospecting is there, skills, right? As Anthony says, skill set. But they definitely want to see a little bit of product stuff as well. Anthony, any thoughts on this data? I mean, it shouldn't seem surprising to you, but are there any nuances you want to kind of provide around this?
I think partying is underrepresented in the data there, so I'm skeptical on that one. I think that was people who thought they must have had to put their name on the survey in order to have a 3.32. I think that one's probably somewhere closer to 97% would be my guess. I think that when you ask people what they want, and you started with the prospecting as the poll, I do think that people want help with where they're really challenged, and I think they want to leave with new skills so they can do better work. And I do think that you have to pay attention to that. So I'm not surprised to see the more sales skills for taking qualified opportunities through the process all the way to close. That's what we do every day. We create and capture opportunities. So all that work tends to be, in my experience, what people want the most and what they're most engaged in.
Sarah makes a comment here, and Sarah, this is a wonderful comment. I'm calling this out. She says a product-based kickoff takes the accountability off of sales managers, the easy way out, because they just become spectators. A skill set, mindset-based sales kickoff requires management share in the accountability, right? Pre and post. So definitely agree with that, Sarah. There's a question here also from, I'm going to take the one from Richard. The one from Richard basically says, Anthony, you talked about level 4 knowledge, but that requires so much, or level 4 value, but that requires so much knowledge. How can a salesperson actually do that? And where do they kind of develop that skill set? Because most of the time, and another kind of commenter has said this, Anthony, most of the time, the majority of sales training is kind of laser focused and all pushed towards the kickoff. So for those 2, 3, 4 magical days, we're expecting salespeople to kind of cram, learn everything, and then take it to market and be successful. So how does a person get that level 4 value created?
You know, you have to take this into your own hands. I'm getting a little bit of an echo there, maybe on your side. You have to take this into your own hands. If you are a professional salesperson, you're responsible for developing insights and ideas, and you're responsible for business acumen and situational knowledge. There's a bunch of ways you can do it. I would tell you that listening to CNBC and listening to executives be interviewed gives you a great deal of insight. I think reading widely, not just reading sales books for sure, but reading widely about business and concepts. I think interviewing your clients and saying, help me understand how somebody like me should create value for you. What are you looking for in partners? What kind of places do you need help? When I was a young salesperson, I asked every client I interviewed them about how does somebody like me help you? What concepts do I need to know more about? How do I create value? And going over that ground with 5 or 6 clients in a row and starting to understand the themes that they were dealing with, and then going out and researching that to say, what kind of data can I pull into this conversation? What kind of insights can I find? That's what really makes you a trusted advisor. I continually tease sales audiences with a question, what do you need to be a trusted advisor? And they give me all kinds of answers, but there's just 2 things, trust and advice. I mean, it's a 2-part recipe. You got to have both parts. So where do you get the advice? You have to have a set of experiences and a set of knowledge that your company's probably not going to give you, that you need to get from your experiences and talking to other reps and making sure that you're interviewing clients in a way where you're learning more from every interaction that you have so that you have a greater and greater knowledge base to draw on. I don't pretend that that's easy. I do believe that it's necessary. This is the new competency for salespeople, business acumen. You're on mute.
Thanks for calling me out on that. I was saying, Anthony, you're speaking from a universal perspective there, but if I were to kind of parse that down into our neck of the woods around social and digital selling, you know, one of the big questions we're asked by sales professionals is, well, how do I find the right content? Like, how do I get the content in the hands of my customer or prospect that's going to make them say, aha, this is something new and unique, something that's being presented to me that I've never seen or rarely seen. And it's a challenge, right? It's because most companies don't, quite frankly, have the infrastructure or the willingness yet to provide that level of depth to their salespeople. They want them to be these kind of like cookie cutter robots, I believe. So I would say that as a sales professional, if you're listening to this, that's one of the biggest values that Anthony just mentioned, that if you invest in yourself by becoming educated about the customer's business, then you essentially start differentiating yourself. I want to go to the next slide here and start talking about this point around, you know, one of the biggest things that we've seen as a success here at Sales for Life. One thing that many of our clients do at kickoffs that we're in is they gamify experiences. I'll share a story with you. So we have a client, a global technology player, and basically we hosted an event in person on site called Social Selling with the Sharks. And it was a fun play on the TV show, but essentially it allowed a lot of their executive leadership, some frontline sales leadership, and some top social selling performers who were vying for that kind of reputation and that attention to all come together and see what things were working to better the sales experience using social and digital. So we made a contest out of it. It worked so well, we've basically replicated this. So we love role-based training scenarios like that, where there's contests and games. Anthony, is this kind of going more towards the mindset side of your equation, or is it more skill set when you do role-based training?
I think it's. I think you're capturing both. I think you're getting the opportunity to do both of those things at the same time, which I think is really important. I'm doing a kickoff in. Well, I got a little bit of feedback from you. Not sure what changed on this. You have to mute yourself, Amar.
Yeah, I'll mute myself. I'll mute myself.
I'm doing a kickoff in January where we're doing the voice. I mean, there's going to be a role-based training. People are going to compete. We're going to have people that select their coach to go on to the championship rounds. And I think that the level of engagement gives them both the mindset shift and the skill set shift. And it also gives people an example of what good looks like. And I think that's what a lot of us are missing now in sales, because we don't work in bullpens anymore. We're not rubbing up against each other and hearing all these conversations that are going on in the office. And it used to be in a bullpen sort of environment, you're picking up all this language and you're picking up all these concepts that you can mimic. And now that's missing. So we have to find a way to replicate that as often as we can. And letting people do that in a training, in a game, in a contest where people can start to capture that is super helpful. Because if I don't have the words, or I don't have the concept, or I don't have the mindset, watching and listening to other people do what's good and what works is super useful in helping me get better results right now.
Totally agree. I love that idea, by the way. That's very neat. I'm going to catch up with you offline to learn more. Folks, let's talk about the next point, right, which is execution beyond the kickoff. So one of the biggest things that we've seen in the world of training is that training just happens as a one-time event. Now, based on the slide that you're seeing in front of you, let me actually just fast forward this. But the data from the training and learning world basically says the following, that if you were to just take learning overall, 10% comes from initial training, 20% through application, and then 70% through reinforcement. What are you folks doing? Or are you going to kickoffs where everything is just kind of smacked together and contained in those couple of days? Because what we've seen from our end is that when clients actually take ideas and roll them out over time and bring people together, there's a higher and more significant lift as a result. Anthony, do you want to comment on this?
Very much. I've spoken to sales organizations sometimes 3 years in a row, and I immediately know whether or not they actually expect people to transform and execute what they're being taught within minutes of being there and minutes of speaking. If I'm giving a keynote and I see the executive leadership team leave to have another meeting, then I'm 100% confident that this initiative is not going to stick. And if I'm doing any kind of a workshop and the sales managers are not in that workshop, the sales leadership team is not in the workshop, it is not going to stick, and it's not intended to. It's simply checking the box. But alternatively, if I'm at a sales kickoff and the first table has the CEO sitting at the table, and when we do a workshop, all the managers are sitting there, I know that the sales force is in for a rough time over the next 90 days because they intend to transform and change. So a lot of people are just checking the box. I'll give you one other example. I was with one company, they announced 9 new products, and they sent the sales force through a half-hour training, workshop to workshop to workshop over a couple of days, just to introduce 9 new products. There's no way anybody got anything out of that time. So it's the content and how it's delivered, and all of it is execution on the back end. If the leadership team is committed to making the change and they're sitting there and they're going through it with everyone else, you're going to change. And it really is the reinforcement over time that creates the bulk of the results. It feels to me like it's even greater than 70, because if there is no reinforcement, everything they just learned is gone just like that.
Talk to me about the leadership side of it, because we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing organizations that kind of call us, Anthony, and say, hey, come speak at our kickoff or come speak at our regional event, and we want you to do a 90-minute keynote on social selling. It's fine and dandy. There's a lot of rah, but hardly anything sticks. How do leaders decide that something is worth it and investing time in? And talk to me about why they would just want to tick the box. Like, why actually spend time, money, energy, resources on just ticking a box if there's no significant upside post-event?
Well, I think a lot of people think they have to have the kickoff meeting. They've had it, so it's a chance to get the whole team together and talk to them. They get the team together, so they get to meet each other and spend time with each other. So there's a benefit to doing that. The way that leaders should think about this specifically is, whatever we're going to do at sales kickoff, what are we going to be committed to when it comes to accountability for generating the results and adopting the content that we're delivering at Sales Kickoff? And there's I don't want to call it a degradation or an erosion, but those words are close, of accountability generally. We don't want to hold people accountable. We don't want to have difficult conversations. We don't want to have a pipeline meeting to make sure opportunities are being created every week. And so the accountability in sales organizations has dropped dramatically. And that is the difference between success and failure in all cases, especially in a transformation. So if you're going to bring in new content, you're going to have new mindset, new skill set, unless you're willing to hold people accountable for that change simply will not occur. And it doesn't matter how good the keynote speaker is, and it doesn't matter how good the workshop is. If there's not somebody there to say, these are the behavioral changes I'm going to measure from week to week until it's a competency, it just isn't going to happen. I think that's probably your experience too, because it's fairly universal.
Yeah, absolutely. There's companies out there that take social and digital selling as a nice to have. They'll say they've ticked the box, but realistically, there's no kind of follow up in that. Dirk actually agrees with you, Anthony. He says, after all of this comes the end of the year, the reinforcement piece flies away, and then it's all about show me the sales, right? Lorena has a great comment here, which is, we develop a professional development webinar series. These are bi-weekly and help reinforce vertical strategies, sales concepts, plus reinforce other types of training like product training. But the challenge is to get good attendance. And I think, Lorena, just to kind of add to that, yeah, definitely. We do very similar things. We do it once every 2 to 4 weeks for some clients. And you're right. But I think overall, I've read a data point years and years ago, and I used to work in the marketing department at one point in my career. And an old CMO of mine basically said, it takes 36 times for the human brain to fully absorb a concept. So if you take that data, that's so powerful that reinforcement has to continue, right? To Anthony's point, that 70% is probably not enough. It probably should be 80, 90% of the whole game. Because if you're not willing to get it to become a behavioral change, what's the point? It's like they take the training, they apply a little bit, but then it kind of just whisks away, right? Anthony, what are your thoughts on what Lorena has said? Is that a good tactic for those listening? Should there be almost like a post follow-up every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks once an idea is actually generated or taught at a kickoff?
I don't think that's a bad idea, but I would change the focus. I mean, if the leadership team, if the sales managers and the sales leadership team isn't going to have a weekly accountability to inspect the behavioral changes, then you can keep showing them the information as many times as you want to. But unless I'm willing to say, I'll just have fun with this because it's Amar. Amar, I asked you to make 20 cold calls last week. I just want to see what kind of results you had. Did you make your calls? And did you create new opportunities? Don't talk, Amar, because I know he's going to say, no, I went on LinkedIn and generated the same 20 outcomes. But I'm trying to make a point. It's the behavioral change that actually generates the result. It's not necessarily the knowledge. The knowledge is important, but I need people to change their behaviors. And it's the sales manager that's the constraint here. And unless the sales manager is willing to have the uncomfortable conversations and to model this and to go out on sales calls with their salespeople, it just doesn't happen. People slip right back into what they're comfortable with. Unmute.
Yeah, sorry, folks. I've been kind of setting the stage for this because I wanted to present some really neat data for all of you to consider, because we're in kickoff planning season right now, right? A lot of you are probably in meetings trying to plan events and trainings, et cetera, for your kickoff. I want to give you a little bit of hope and some data that shows that it's worth it to invest time in reinforcement. So the data from Aberdeen Group on your screen here kind of says that if you invest time in not just kickoff training around mindset, skill set, but just continuing that out, there's a lift in quota. And I would say that there's a lift in quota based on what Anthony's talking about, which is that there's a behavior change happening on the ground, right? You have to drive to that behavior change. No amount of programs or training attendance can do that. It's a manual effort that the entire org needs to get behind. So I hope you find that data point compelling. I want to switch the conversation a little bit, and we'll kind of move towards the end here, but I want to talk about the role of sales leadership, right? When we go to kickoffs, we generally, and all of us are kind of in this boat, we see that there's a ton of training for sales reps, all types of sales reps. There'll be a specific type of training for inside sales and one type of training for your customer success teams, etc. But what about the sales leaders? And I'm not just talking about the chief sales officer, but actual frontline sales leaders. And there's data here that actually shows that companies that invest time, energy, and resources, I know here it's in terms of overall sales training budgets, which is very bold, but just I think the concept is powerful. Are you investing in your sales leaders? Anthony, what are some trends and patterns that you're seeing around this?
I'm seeing a realization that the constraint on the results is the sales management team ultimately, and the training budget's moving that direction, because they know unless those people are equipped to coach, develop, train, reinforce what's been taught, the results don't follow. So I've actually seen people say we were going to do more sales training, but we're switching that over to managers because it's more important that they get trained, especially on any new concepts first. I think that's interesting. I always talk about the book Ender's Game when you talk about leadership, because the first part of the introduction, Orson Scott Card talks about reading a 3-volume set of books on the Civil War. And his insight that caused him to write the book Ender's Game, which is a terrible movie, by the way, but a great book, is Lincoln had 4 generals that ran the Union Army for him, and Grant was the last one. But they all had the same men, they had the same horses, they had the same terrain, same enemy. Everything is the same except the leader. And you swap out a good leader for a timid, fearful leader who doesn't want to use and deploy the resources effectively, and it's the difference between success and failure. I mean, the people who deploy the resources, who decide what's an initiative, what's important, what am I holding people accountable for, is what really generates those results. So I'm not surprised to see your data, which this is the first time I've seen it, but I think that it's correct. And I do have experience that says there are more people who are paying a lot more attention here.
Yeah, I saw this recently, and in our business in the last 5 years or so, we've seen an uptick in the last 24 months where companies are actually making a concerted effort to train their leaders, especially on new initiatives, et cetera, as Anthony said. But I think there's another nuance to all of this, right? Which is that most of us in sales view our sales leaders almost as contributors and people that just are there. And I think there's something to be said about a mindset shift. And I see it happening on the ground, Anthony. I'd love to get your thoughts. But I think a lot of the companies in the past just took their top salesperson and promoted them to be a leader. I think that was the general kind of gist of path of self-promotion. But now we're actually seeing the right players get into the seats. And what I define as the right player is the one that is willing and able to coach effectively. What are your thoughts to that?
I've had people argue with me over the last decade that there's not a difference between leadership and management. And I think what people are realizing now in greater numbers, and this might be to the same point that you're making, it is a leadership role. It is the role where you're actually leading others, which means you're investing in them, you're training them, you're developing them, you're coaching them, you're sharing a vision with them, and you're helping them develop to the capacity to generate the greatest results that they're capable of. I mean, and that's what a leader does. A leader sees something in you that you don't see in yourself. And I think that may not be the person who's producing the best sales results. That's a different skill set. It's a different mindset. There's different competencies that individual needs. It really is a leadership role. And the more you have somebody who is a leader in that role, the better results you produce.
Great point. Great point. I want to move towards wrap up here, folks. We're going to move right towards the end here in interest of time, but I want to get into questions because I know there's a lot, and Anthony, I want to field a few good ones to you here. There's a great one here by Crystal, and Crystal asks, as a salesperson, Anthony, how would you approach pushing your sales department and your company leadership to have the right priorities, to deploy resources, to set up the right kickoffs? How does a salesperson as an individual contributor, get stuff done? Do we need a union here, or what's going on?
I would tell you, Crystal, right?
Yes.
My strong recommendation is to turn all of your sales skills internally and start building consensus in all the people you know as to what deficiencies exist and what would close those gaps. And you have the stories, the anecdotes, the experience to go and do that. But you're going to start, I'll just use the lost art of closing as an example. We're going to ask somebody for a commitment to give us some time so we can explore some ideas. We're going to ask them about, does it make sense to change? Do you agree that these capacities could be improved, and how would we do that? And you start building consensus around that. And then you get some other peers to help you sell. I think you take it as a team. I think that we underestimate the power that we have as a rep, number one, but we definitely underestimate our capacity to make change inside our own organization, because it always feels like we're fighting the internal sale being harder than the external sale. But that's a choice. You can make the internal sale easier. You just have to turn all your skills on those individuals. I often tease sales leaders when they say to me, Anthony, our salespeople suck at negotiating. And I'm like, I don't know. You seem to let them, you approve every discount they give. I mean, they're just better. They just negotiate with you instead of your clients. They're actually really good negotiators. And then they usually say, fair point. You are pretty good at negotiating with your managers and leaders. So turn that attention to them.
It's a great point. Great point. Question from Kurt, and it's a little bit not totally germane to this conversation, but Kurt really insists I get this to you, Anthony, which is, would you agree that the form of how we compensate the sales teams today has a major influence on the results? So using old compensation methods will inhibit change overall. Agree, disagree, in the middle?
Comp is a very difficult subject. I mean, it depends. Here's what I would say, Kurt. I think that we suffer from the belief that comp is the biggest lever that we can pull when it comes to motivating people. But in my experience, and not only in my experience, the data shows that about 5% of people are money motivated. And how do I know that? Because there's the top 5% of wage earners who make over $383,000 a year. So the top 5% is 5%. There are a lot of people with the opportunity to make that much money or more, and they don't, because they have a lid on what they think that they can develop and what they're comfortable with. And if that's 105,000, they make 105,000 instead of 272,000 or whatever the number is. I think that we misuse it. It's one part of a value prop for an employee, and it's one part of what motivates human beings, but it doesn't tend to be the main driver for very many people, because I know this to be a fact. Money motivated people, you can always spot them because they have money, because they're motivated. It's not that they want more money. Every human being wants more money, but very few are motivated to actually go get that money.
Yeah, great point. Great point. I want to go to a question here. Folks, I'm going to consolidate some questions here and get one final question to Anthony here, all around. Why is sales training so challenging at kickoffs? And what can, and this is sorry, Anthony, let me give you the background. This is a marketing manager who has asked me not to read their name. So let's just call them Marketing Mary if you can. And Mary essentially is asking, why are companies so rigid when it comes to sales kickoff when there is an abundance of good ideas from the sales team and marketing team to do exciting things around knowledge-based training? Why are they always moving to product first?
There's a number of problems there. I'll just tell you generally what happens. We're going to get 500 salespeople together in a room, and every single person in the company finds that that's their opportunity to share what they want to share with that sales force. And I'll just give you the worst experience I had this year so far. There's still time. I could have a worse experience. The first person to speak was the CFO, who went through the financial results. The CFO was followed by the CEO, who basically reiterated the financial results. And then they brought up the sales leader, who went into great depth talking through the financial results. And there was literally no joy and no love in the room at all. And then they went into product-based training. And I was the only thing that wasn't anything like that as the keynote speaker. And I was the best speaker on the stage because the bar was like this high off the ground. I mean, there was no content for salespeople to put their arms around. There was just a recitation of, this is a new product and this is the financial results. And there wasn't anything there. I think it's because everybody piles their agenda on, and I think you have to go back to first principles and say, as a marketing manager, to go and say, what is the real outcome? What do we want people to do differently? Because if you think that showing them the numbers are going to cause them to behave differently, you're wrong. They're not going to behave differently. They're not going to create greater value from clients, and they're not going to generate the results that you want by simply showing them a product and spending. I told you the one story, they literally put people through 9 half-hour product introductions. That's not training. You can check the box if you want to, but nobody was changed. Their behaviors weren't changed, and they were no better prepared to go sell that product than had they not done it and done something else. But I would push back on that and say, let's get to first principles. What do we want from these people, and how do we enable it?
Anthony, one last question, which is, what's your next book and what are you working on now?
Okay, 2 books at the same time. The third book I can tell you is going to be a book about competitive displacements, because I recognize how much of us, there's the blue ocean strategy where you go where there's no blood in the water, but for most of us, we're surrounded by sharks and the water's red. So I'm writing a book about competitive displacements. How do you take business from your competitors, and how do you open up those dream client opportunities and win them?
That's awesome. Anthony, really want to thank you for being here. Folks, Anthony Iannarino here. I hope you've gotten great value from today. As you plan your next sales kickoff, let us know if you have any questions or additional perspectives that you'd like to share. And Anthony, thanks again for being here. Really appreciate your time and the value that you deliver the entire industry and our very awesome sales community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we'll see you later. Have a wonderful and positive day. Take care.